Hello, Dane Brooks. This case study presentation is for EDU 503 Sports Law, week 4.1. For this week, I chose case study 7.4, which was Hall versus the University of Minnesota. In this case, the plaintiff, Mark Hall, has filed suit against the defendant, which is the University of Minnesota, in reference to Mark being ineligible to compete on the men's basketball team. Mark filed an injunction asking the court to rule that the university should enroll him or admit him in one of their degree programs so that he may continue his role on the basketball team. This case took place back in the 1980s. In the 1980s, requirements for eligibility were not quite as defined as they are today. In 1981, Mark, who was a basketball player at the University of Minnesota, had been enrolled in a non-degree or non-baccalaureate program. Back then, the University of Minnesota had two, sister colleges or colleges within the college. They were known as the General College and the University Without Walls, both of which are brought up in this injunction. Because he was enrolled in the non-degree program with the General College, he was allowed to compete as a member of the University of Minnesota basketball team. However, in 1981, the program that he was in was terminated, which left him ineligible and no longer able to compete on the University of Minnesota basketball team. On December 15th, 1981 was when Mark filed his action against the university, alleging that two applications that he had sent in to the University Without Walls were improperly denied and rejected without affording him due process. On December 29th, 1981, Mark moved that his injunction be expedited or mainlined because he was trying to meet a deadline of being eligible by January 4th, 1982. In that case, he would be eligible to play the winter semester of his senior season, which would also allow him to become eligible for the NBA draft that following spring. The court had a lot to take into account in this injunction. It was obvious the court felt that the main primary reason that Mark was petitioning for eligibility was not for the purpose of obtaining a degree from the University of Minnesota, but for the guaranteed money that would come with a contract of him being drafted within the first or second round of the NBA draft. Mark had applied for admissions into the University Without Walls, a sister college within the University of Minnesota, in August of 1981 and again in October the same year. Both times, the admissions committee agreed that based solely on his application that he should be admitted into one of the university's introductory degree programs. However, in each case, directors or higher ups within the university or within the introductory programs intervened and directed the admissions committee to deny his applications. In the evidence presented by Mark to the court, Dean Lupton, who was a director of the General College, had met with members of the committee at the University Without Walls and had shared some controversial information about Mark that he felt would interfere or keep him from being admitted. Some of that information included accusations such as Mark had earned A's in classes that he was not eligible to be in, that he would turn in homework that was done by other people, and that he at times would turn in multiple fake approval forms that he had gotten his hands on to get him into classes that he was not required to be in or was not eligible to be in. Um, with that being said, every time that his application came up for approval, it was ultimately denied. The kicker with that is that Mark was technically eligible in the eyes of the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association. He had had the necessary grades to play for the University of Minnesota. He had met all of the completed number of credit hour requirements to compete. But for whatever reason, the university was the one that was ultimately keeping Mark from participating on the basketball team and potentially being drafted in the NBA. According to a pamphlet that was sent out by the University Without Walls regarding the policies of the procedure for admissions, the number one, all information that was presented in the application would determine whether or not he or she was admitted into the university. Two, all admissions decisions were based solely on the responses of the application form. Three, the application would be reviewed and acted upon by an admissions committee made up of University Without Walls advisors, and that all people would be notified in writing of the committee's decision. And if they were not accepted, in Mark's case, they would receive all the reasons for that decision would be explained in writing. Both times in Mark's case where he was denied admissions, he never received any information in writing explaining why. And had he known that Dean Lumpton had previously talked to the committee and accused him of such things as plagiarism with homework or falsifying reports, he would have had a chance to, one, protect himself or defend himself against those allegations. And the fourth part is that the admissions committee will determine which applicants will be admitted for enrollment in the introductory period. A faculty advisor or director testified that those policies were indeed correct in regards to admissions and that all applications were to be judged solely on the basis of their application form. Clearly, that was not the case when it came to Mark. The committee originally recommended him for admission both times prior to being convinced by directors higher above to deny his admission. The court looked at four factors when determining whether or not this injunction could be upheld or could be presented. And those factors were, number one, when it comes to due process, number one, the threat of irreparable harm to a moving party. In this case, the moving party was Mark, and if he was not deemed eligible by January 4th, 1982, he would not be able to play his senior year, and therefore, back in the 80s, the NBA draft did not just have 2 rounds like it does today, where the first round is guaranteed contracts and the second round is not. They had 6 rounds at that time, and if he'd have got to play his senior year, he was projected to go first or second round, which carried the guaranteed contract money. If he was not eligible by January 4th, he would not have been able to participate his senior year, and he probably would have slipped into one of those later rounds where the guaranteed money was not a factor. Number 2, the state of balance between that harm and the injury that granting the injunction will inflict on other parties. In this case, the court did not feel that the basketball program at the University of Minnesota would face any harm, but more of the academic wing of the university. They felt that if this injunction was filed, that the credibility and integrity of their athletic standards would have been undermined. The third is the public interest. The public interest for this case is the hardest one to kind of read because public perception is always changing. The court had to ask themselves: does the public want a highly tuned athlete who spends all of his college time honing his skills for the NBA, or do they want a athlete of Mark's ability to also make significant strides or significant advances towards a degree while he's there playing basketball? And the last one was the probability that the movement will succeed on the merits of claim. How successful does the evidence make his case? And in this case, it was remarkable in Mark's case. He had already shown evidence that the University Without Walls and the General College did not handle his application process correctly according to their policies. And he was also able to contradict testimony given by Dean Lumpton, who I mentioned earlier. Lumpton stated that Mark's summer school credits and his grades were not good enough to get him into a introductory program. However, his transcript showed that he had He was enrolled in 30 hours of credit during the summer, and in those classes received 3 A's, 4 B's, 1 C, and 1 satisfactory grade, which are well enough for him to be introduced. And so, with that evidence, the court ruled in favor of Mark, and he was able to be eligible by January 4th, 1982, which allowed him to complete his senior year of eligibility for basketball, as well as be entered into the NBA draft. I know it's a sticky situation when it comes to eligibility and academics. How many college athletes are there to get an education, and how many college athletes are there to better their chances of making money in the NBA or the NFL, whatever the professional series is afterwards. I think it would be interesting to look and see what colleges that are successful in sports are also successful in academics, and I think you would find out that, especially in the era of one and done now, especially in college basketball, that those schools are going to be, obviously they're going to be competing for national championship every year, but at the same time, their graduation rate has got to be significantly lower than any other program. Again, I agree with the NCAA's with this court's decision on this. If he was eligible in the NCAA's eyes and had done everything that he was supposed to do to get into a degree program, then I don't see why the school would have a problem with it. At the same time, if the basketball team had a problem with it, once he was deemed eligible, nothing said that the school had to play him. All it said that they had to do was make it eligible. So I agree with the case. It was an interesting case, and I really enjoyed it.